In this lesson, I'll walk you through one of my labels, from format to composition and what we have here. When I first was approached on this design, I was commissioned to do the label design of these products, but the shape of it was given to me. My first task was to create appropriation for me as a designer with a label. So, if you see this shape, it's a circle here, followed by these little indentations on the corners, and a straight line, indentation, and then a straight line. At first glance, I couldn't see what was inside here or here. So the first thing that I did is create an oval here to break down this format. The second part I did was creating this oval here to compensate what was going on at the bottom. Then I did a quick sketch of how I wanted this word to be to create more dynamism in the composition. Then a straight line here of the brand, and then the mandatories and the description here. So from top to bottom, we'll have the hierarchy is very clear on what is going on in the center because the letters are quite big. And then everything kind of falling down in this part with the use of these blocks. As I said, what was given to me was just the shape on the outside, nothing inside. My task as a designer is to create the world that is happening inside the format. And the only way to create appropriation on the design is through the composition and the design elements. So if the composition in this case was at top and the bottom, what was going on inside was up to me. I wanted to create something that it felt a bit more dynamic. So that's why I create this diagonal here. And then all the elements that are composed around this part, they needed to be together so you can read agave, gin, receta oaxaqueña in a more harmonic way, but still dynamic. If you look at this part in here, marking the dark blue, this oval, this is mirroring the shape of the bottle. I created this first because I wanted to have some relationship between the bottle and the label itself. This part is mirrored in this part too, which is also reflected of what is happening on the bottom, this oval here, the medallion. The balance is important in this part, so we have a relationship between the top and the bottom of the label. Even if these are elements that are disconnected and they are interrupted in some ways by the name, the harmony of the label is not just through color, but through shapes. Oval and oval. Because I wanted to create and follow the dynamic composition that I was having here, I wanted to have the use of text almost as an illustrative element. All these parts of the name, Hecho en Mexico, the description, and produced and bottled were creating almost like a layer cake, if you think of that. What we have here in the center is the most important part of the label. All these texts are secondary, but in itself, from top to bottom, they follow a hierarchy. Because of the diagonal on the word gin is giving us in this shape some sort of slice, like a triangle here, followed by another triangle here. It was necessary to me to create the shape of the triangle with the design elements, in this case, the typography and the illustration. I did the same in here in this side, with the dry gin, 2 medallions, and then this illustration that follows here. The relationship between these two elements is what is bringing harmony to the main element of GIN, gin. For the medallions, they were created to communicate the quality of the product. Back in the day, because the aesthetic of the label is quite nostalgic, so I wanted the brand to have their own recognitions to express and communicate this sense of proudness of the product. If you see in here, these are very circular compositions, almost concentric, because they are informed by its own format, that in this case is this metal, this kind of coin. In the center, we have 2 monograms, and then on path, we have these curves, agave gin, non plus ultra, grand premium, which are kind of mirroring, echoing the circular shapes. For the parts on this Hecho en Mexico and dry gin, you'll see that the space I had is not that wide as it was in Gracias a Dios. In this case, it's already telling me that by space, I'm gonna need a condensed font. The same happened here, not because I needed more space, but because I wanted to mirror this design element with this one to create more harmony again. So when I was designing this label, I placed the illustrative elements first to then make the typographic decisions. In this case, the floral ornament here, because I had the two medallions, they follow the same shape, so they feel they work together. Secondarily, Hecho en Mexico and Dry Gin, they were almost kind of grounding the whole composition on the center to the baseline in here, which is connecting this element to this other element that is a box of made with Oaxacan ingredients. Because of the message of the bottle literally is just about the gin, that's just the base, but the secondary message of this label is Receta Oaxaqueña, which is inspired by heritage, provenance, and culture. This in itself needed to have a richness and proudness of being Mexican, something that expresses tradition. These two elements, Receta Oaxaqueña and made with Oaxacan ingredients, are considered those kind of cultural elements because of the fonts. This all English font is also represented in Mexico in different sorts of signage. So I wanted to have these elements here as a nod to those traditions. For the bottom part of the label, because the first thing that I decided was to have this medallion here, the bar that is crossing here needed to work in combination harmoniously with the badge. In the text, this is almost telling you that you'll need to find something that is customized, and there is where I use my own custom lettering. The same happens here in the initials of Oaxaca and Mexico, because in all together, this also should express that is handcrafted and unique. That's why I use lettering that has been customized for this label. Because sometimes we have different limitations on the text itself, and sometimes we need to express further the spirit itself. Those are the parts where custom lettering is needed. When we customize something, as in this case for the label, we're also tagging that message implicitly to the handcrafted spirit. Because sometimes we need to communicate through the design elements the origin of the product itself, in this case, a handcrafted gin. I also took that as an opportunity to have handcrafted lettering. So you can customize your own elements to express what the product is about. Some of the elements on the label are mandatory, such as the ABV and the proof and the millimeters here. These elements really need to be at the top or the bottom of the composition. Why stand out? In order to do that, I was also informed by the shape that is happening here. This is a font that I use, but similarly of what happened with Hecho en Mexico, I needed a condensed font. So you will see also similarities across the whole label when we have condensed font here, and here. So they're kind of mirroring each other to get more balance. Ultimately, the work in itself, it needs to feel a bit artistic. So the decisions I made are based on the concept of the label or the product. In this case, once again, I wanted to express Mexican heritage and traditions, so an element of this handcraftedness on the elements and the typography were needed, almost imperative. The whole composition on the label needed to feel that belongs to each other. It doesn't matter if it's a mandatory or is the main title or is bottled. All the design elements needs to work together. Are legally more important as the mandatories at the top. Some of them are just bringing more interesting language to the label, as is the produce and bottle. But really, the objective on all this is that all the elements work together in the same way. Because the name of the product itself is Gracias a Dios Agave Gin, I wanted this to work together in a way that it doesn't feel too obvious. As I said, I put this on a straight line here, but then agave seated on top of the curve of the G was bringing them together almost like a bridge. So the ornament in here is connected to the agave, and then agave is connected to gin. So in this way, the three of them can be read together. Secondarily, I also included a gradient inside agave, which is also found in the illustration in this part. In this way, all the elements, again, will work harmoniously. The gradient in here is giving more volume and dimension to this part. It's also adding a bit more detail, but because of this is the darker color under this element here, it's kind of casting the shadow of the element in here that is the illustration. In this breakdown, I told you about format and composition and how the elements work with each other. But I also start mentioning hierarchy, rhythm, space, color, concepts that we'll learn further in our next unit.